So basically, Bog Boy came about through one day I was going for a walk near my house, and I go walking quite a lot down the bog, and I saw this bunch of flowers on the bog, and it was quite bizarre because the colours were just so incongruous to the colours of the bog. It's very kind of brown and grey and that, and I went over to see what the flowers were, and beside them there was a little picture of this boy. He looked about 17. He had a furry kind of jacket around his head, like an old snorkeler you'd see in the 70s, and a big kind of grinning face, and black hair and a black moustache. And I was really taken by the image because it was in those real old 70s colours, and I realised that he was obviously one of the disappeared, because this was in 2001 and there was an amnesty at the time where the IRA were invited to give up the information of people that they had murdered and buried in the early 1970s. And I had heard a rumour that there was a young boy from Belfast apparently buried in the bog near my house. So it was quite bizarre to see this photograph quite starkly sitting there on the bog, and I began to imagine, God, who is he? What happened? Was he torn from his bed in the dead of night? And I could imagine the kind of car whisking down the old bog road, and I was really taken by it and kind of haunted by this image and this notion that somebody's life had been so brutally kind of taken from them so near to my home in a place that seems very kind of peaceful and idyllic. And then bizarrely enough, 2 days later I was walking by, and it had been sunny and there had been some rain, and there were the flowers. I went over to look at the picture again, and the face had disappeared through photosynthesis. And just that moment I thought, my God, he's disappeared all over again. And that kind of stayed with me, and the story stayed with me, and I began to think a lot about the disappeared and about that group of people. There were a group of civilians from Belfast that had been taken and had been murdered, and it just stayed with me for a while. And the idea of a play began to grow, but I didn't want to look at it in a very direct way. I wanted to think about the story and the humanity that was at the heart of it. So I came up with this idea of a girl called Brigit, who's a struggling heroin addict, and she's on rehab in Navan, working in the local cafe. And she befriends this local outlaw, Hughie, and he's a bit of a character, a bit of a recluse, spends his time tipping around trimming trees and painting walls and that. So a very unlikely friendship grows up between himself and Brigit, and it's like a clash of two cultures really, because Brigit's all rehab and denial and social workers and that world, whereas Hughie, you know, is kind of embedded in nature and in a kind of a history and a past and a rural Ireland that she can never understand. So you have this friendship that grows between the two of them, and it's a very special time in Brigit's life because it's a time where she sees hope and she sees a future. She's basically got a 10-month-old child who's in care. She's trying to get clean to get the child back. But underneath this story of friendship and this kind of hope for future, you get the feeling that there's something ominous going on, and that there's something kind of dark hidden in the past. And sure enough, during Brigit's time there, the guards start digging in the bog for a body that has been buried there years before. And she becomes familiar with the story of the disappeared and the story of this boy. And she's attracted to it because, as Brigit says herself, she's always attracted to shite. So there's this kind of linking between the story of Brigit, the story of this boy from Belfast, and the story of Hughie Dolan, a local who's kind of lived there all his life. And the three stories become intertwined, and there's kind of a cathartic ending then when Brigit tries to in some way redeem a future for Gerard, the young boy that was buried in the bog. So it's quite a layered story. There's shifting timelines in it. There's a lot of comedy in it because of that kind of clash of urban and rural culture, and it certainly has kind of storytelling and this notion of shifting times, but a common humanity at the centre of it.